Welcome back to Pride Matters, Salford Pride's official podcast, where we give a voice to communities in Salford and beyond. I'm Ricki Hewitt, the head of people, and unfortunately Connor had other commitments, which meant he couldn't make it today. And because of the local COVID-19 restrictions in Greater Manchester, that meant that none of the other team members would be able to come and join me as well. This month, we mark Black History Month, a time in the calendar to reflect and recognise the role that Black and ethnic minority communities have made throughout history. From Marsha P. Johnson, who threw the first brick at Stonewall, to Mae C. Jameson, who took us to the stars. This year has given us an undeniable opportunity to recognise the visible and invisible forms of racism and discrimination that Black and ethnic minority communities face every single day. Black people have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. We've seen the horrific murder of George Floyd and no justice for Breonna Taylor. Black and ethnic minority communities need allies now more than ever. In their schools, in their workplaces, in government, on the streets, out in their communities. We all need to stand up to take the Black Lives Matter movement forward and work to amplify those Black community voices. And that's why we're going to be celebrating Black voices and working with the communities in Salford and Greater Manchester to take the movement forward and celebrate Black history. So hi, Ayisatu, thank you for joining us at Pride Matters. How are you?
I'm doing quite nicely today. I'm feeling excited to be here.
Thank you. So just firstly, Ayisatu, will you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Ayisatu is we were joking before that I'm just a busy bee. I just like to keep doing things in general. But all in all, the projects that I find myself working on involve me getting people out of a rut, trying to make sure people have access to support that is around them. Because a lot of the time it's just lack of information to get through to support. So I support the Caribbean and African Health Network, largely as a volunteer, but they have a project that's based where I live in Wigan. And I've been able to get highly involved with that. And we're doing great things for our community right now. And outside of that, I'm the director of Dalia Life, CIC, as well as a co-director of Ekhaya Empowerment with a friend of mine.
Why do you think that recognising Black people in everyday life is important?
Seeing the way the Black Lives Matter has been galvanised this year, it's been going on for some time, but it's so important that people normalise being Black. It's so funny, like we've been around for a long time, but it's such a token thing. You know, if I'm a school governor, for example, in my son's school, and when I say that to someone, they're like, oh, really? And it's that kind of thing of not being able to associate just normal, everyday, good, joyful things with Black people. And it's not necessarily born entirely out of unconscious biases and people being cruel or anything, but if you don't see it, it's kind of hard to believe it. So I think it's so important that whenever you have the opportunity to use your voice and to just add a different dimension to the Black person's story, it's definitely worthwhile. Get out there. We need to just see more of us in different settings, definitely.
So it's obviously Black History Month this month. First, I guess a question is, what does Black History Month mean to you?
Black History Month to me is an odd one, because I think you find a lot of Black people saying now, every month is Black History Month. And it's so true, like that's just who you are. But I think it's so important to acknowledge that there is a lack, again, of visibility, of diversity in the way that people acknowledge Black people. So until we get to the point where you can just simply be human and just be Black, having a concerted effort to educate people, inform people, and open up dialogues and let people know, just let them know the information. Because, you know, every day is, I wouldn't say White History Month, but it's all around us. We're surrounded by a lot of history that doesn't necessarily correlate with our history as well. And it's, I guess, some sort of attempt to make sure we just even things out and just share. You know, again, it's about sharing our stories and having people identify with us as people and recognize that we've made strides and we've made contributions. And there's so many achievements in our community that just have ended up being rewritten or downplayed, and we need to redress that. The time is now. So yeah, I love having Black History Month, because it's just an excuse really for me to just go around and be like, well, actually, if we don't listen any other day of the year, you listen to me this month. It's Black History Month.
I think that's particularly prevalent with 2020. At the start of this podcast, I talked a little bit about the prevalence for Black and ethnic minority communities of COVID-19 and the impact that had. And I know you have a lot of work to do with like health and well-being for those communities. So I guess, what do you think the redress is? How do you think we can healthcare? How can leaders? What is the change that we need to make to recognise, I guess, that Black lives are a part of everyday life and not just something to be recognised during October?
Care, especially in light of the way COVID-19 has played out, I think it's exacerbated things that have existed for some time and just really brought them to the fore. And because everyone has to be paying attention, we're seeing a lot more of the inequalities just sort of emblazoned. But I've kept on bringing it back to the fact that a lot of these inequalities that we're seeing are deeply systemic. They're deeply cultural. It's not a matter of going, oh, okay, we're going to make sure we always treat Black people the way we will treat white people, and that way that will address the issue. Unfortunately, when you have cultural biases, where you have systems in place that have been created to serve the majority, as you would do if you were thinking practically, thinking of the gunky historic stuff aside, if you're being practical, you try to provide for the majority and do bits and bobs for the minority. But the danger in what we've seen is that by preparing so well for the majority, the minority, through so many levels of places where redress is needed, end up at an immense disadvantage that's just entirely disproportionate. So I feel as though, more than anything else, a cultural shift needs to happen where people acknowledge that the system is faulty. Because if you don't acknowledge that the current system is faulty, you won't do the work needed to redress that. And the reality is Black people in general don't necessarily need the exact treatment that a white person or an Asian person or, another ethnic group sort of needs. We all require different things. And that's where this idea of equity really needs to be played out, that give the person what they need, not what you feel they deserve, not what you feel is available, but what they actually require.
Yeah, and I know you're specific to different organisations, work a lot with Black and ethnic minority communities around health and well-being. And like you said, I know that many communities, certainly in the LGBT plus community, people don't feel comfortable all the time accessing healthcare services because of that lack of awareness, lack of training. Do you think that's an issue in the Black and ethnic minority communities as well?
Absolutely. We have to acknowledge, though, that there are two sides to this. There is one thing about, the service that's being provided is inadequate, they're not treating people fairly or with respect. But on the other side, we have cultural traits that mean a lot of the time, for example, a Black person that's come from Africa to the UK as an immigrant may be a lot more shy and may perhaps less outspoken, if you like, than a Black person who was born and raised here. And so the way they will approach someone in the healthcare profession will be different. And that's just within the same, Black community. So there are a lot of these disparities that really need to be acknowledged in order for things to actually get any better. Because even with the service that's being provided, even within, if you like, the white community, there are disparities to talk about over there. There are things that come through from, socioeconomic issues that don't even end up diverging onto race at all. There's things about winning the postcode lottery. You might just live in an area where you get really good treatment. So there's so many things that disrupt things. And unfortunately, in the case of Black people, in the case of the people that we've ended up working with, it's just further compounded by the fact that they're also Black on top of everything else that you just have as being human.
Black people are people. It's a strange thing to make, isn't it? But, I know we talk about intersectionality when we talk about LGBT plus people, people who are Black, who are gay, people who are trans, etc. But Black people aren't just black. They're, you know,
Exactly.
you're women, you're LGBT, you're disabled, some of low income,
Yeah.
etc., etc. You know, it's a compounded issue.
Yeah.
And I know sometimes we talk about issues as though they exist in
In
isolation,
isolation.
which is very frustrating, I'm sure, because I know you work, you know, your community groups are all about empowering communities
Yeah.
who are going to be from different groups
Yeah.
altogether. Um,
Mm.
so you never really see people talking about like disability. You know, if a black person's on the news, it tends to be because something to do
Yeah.
with race has been talked about, not because
Yes.
you know that they're also
Yeah.
disabled, for example. Do you think
Yeah.
that's frustrating? Do you think that's because? Do you think that that is part of this systemic culture that you talk about with discrimination? Do you think we only see black people when there's an issue of race rather than other issues?
Absolutely. And we could definitely speak all day. And it happens in all sorts of subgroups. So, for example, let's say with people who had been born, unfortunately, with some sort of mental disability, for example, if we're talking about 60, 70 years ago, the way they would have been treated, and even in comparison to now, doesn't mean they get golden treatment now, but the disparity in the way that people end up being cared for and the groups that you end up being put in is amazing. Like, I thought it was fantastic. I think only about a year or two ago, I saw that there was like a Zumba instructor who also happened to have Down syndrome. And I remember from when I was younger that when I saw someone with Down syndrome, my attitude, or what I'd learned at least, was that it was over. Like, they had Down syndrome and they were going to be disabled for their life, and they had no other elements to their existence. But the reality is they live quite full lives, and I've seen more and more. So with Black people, it is incredibly frustrating that you get to either be the suffering victim of some sort of racial abuse, or you're the instigator of some unprovoked violence. It's like you're the victim or you're the instigator, and you don't get a lot of dimension to your life. You just don't get to have that, which is again why we go back to the earlier point of visibility of people in different kind of contexts is so vital. Like, I'm certain it's the same in the LGBTQ plus community, where it was a thing of stereotypically like, oh yeah, if you're gay, you must like pink, and you must like go to the clubs, and you must like wearing hot pants, like the stereotypical Bruno, like
Yeah.
type of mentality. But that's not life. Like, I've worked with colleagues who are from the LGBTQ community, and that's not the entirety of who they are. So I think it's so important, and it can be frustrating, and it's a tiring sort of struggle, but it's so important just to get out there, whoever you are, and provide that different voice, irrelevant of how valued you think it is.
No, I definitely agree. I think being able to express yourself no matter who you are, and the importance of being visible and being recognised is really important. What are some of the things that you're I know you have two different groups, and they work. One works with women, mothers specifically, isn't it, about empowering them, and the other group is with like mental and physical well-being in general for people who typically might avoid services. So, what are some of the things that those two different organisations do
Yeah.
to work with those groups to sort of tackle some of those barriers around culture and so on?
So with Ekhaya Empowerment, we are in it's a different situation to when we started. When we started out, we just wanted to provide support to women from the Black community, because that just happened to be where the need was in our space, but it wasn't an exclusive thing. And we just found, especially through lockdown, that there was just subsections of people who needed more help, but would not come forward for cultural sort of traits like having the pride of not wanting to come out and seem weak, some people just being scared, some people having trust challenges because they feel like their business is going to be everywhere. And so even though there are support systems such as the food banks, and there are organizations that do marvelous work supporting people in the community, because of those added barriers that have sort of like generated over time, they just weren't accessing those services. And rather than try to shoehorn someone into a service or try to like force them to deal with something like that when they could be facing like trauma themselves, we thought we'll provide the service then. So with Ekhaya Empowerment, the real crux of it is that we provide swift and practical assistance. So we're building up to doing a lot more. We're hoping to get to a place where, for example, someone who's a lone mother wants to go back into employment. Now, once you want to get a job, and I've seen this challenge even though I'm married, trying to get childcare quickly enough and affordable enough is a challenge.
Yeah.
So because you can't get childcare, you can't start the job. You can't get the job, you can't get money. And before you know it, you've just spent more and more time not reaching any of your goals. So things like providing respite care or providing short-term childcare while they sort themselves out to get to work are the kind of things we support, which ordinarily the job centre wouldn't necessarily facilitate. So we're not trying to duplicate what is already available, but we're just adding that extra just to make sure people can get out of that space, because it can be such a dark space, it can be such a lonely space to need assistance and not know where to go, or at least not trust the places that you're being told to go to. And with Idaraya Life, Idaraya actually is a Yoruba word, which means it refers to things you do to take care of your body. So anything you do to take care of your body is considered to be Idaraya. And I really like this idea of moving. I love moving. I love being active. But during lockdown, I realized more and more that a lot of the people in my sort of social circle did not like it. They're just scared of exercising. They think it's too complicated. They think you need to be fit. They thought all of these things. And I found myself thinking that actually I can do it. And because I could do it and I was willing to be on Zoom and do a workout, I've got family who have not gone to the gym for years. They just wouldn't. But because I was doing it and I was available, they were like, if Ayisatu can do it, I can. And that just got me like on a roll. And I just thought, you know what? I access mental health services. I've had counseling. I've had that kind of support. And I know that a lot of the people in our community especially are quite apprehensive of things like that. And it's so beneficial. It's so helpful. And with all the sort of like casual trauma that's just bandied about to our community, we really, really should be like just engulfing all that support to help regenerate our minds and strengthen our person. And so Idaraya Life was created as a service aimed at people in general, as well as our community, to do physical exercise, go cycling, do outdoor things. If you want to do whitewater rafting, if I can find somewhere to organize it for you, I want people to feel like they can do stuff, because people get bogged down and think you can only be a runner and stuff. And there's so many different ways that you can move your body. So the whole point is creating things that are for the person, as we were saying before, for the person, encourage them to build their own habits that suit their own lifestyle so that they can live fuller lives. Because when you're healthier, it's so great when you don't have to worry about, oh, am I healthy enough? Am I fit enough? Because it can really be all-consuming not to be physically healthy like that. So those are the things that we do.
So amazing work, and you know, I think definitely your passion about those projects definitely shines through. If any of our listeners are interested in those services, whether that's Idaraya Life or Ekhaya Empowerment, where can they find out more about those services?
Right. So Idaraya Life, the website is pending. Literally by the end of this week, I think I'm gonna just hit publish and be done with it. But so you can send an email to Idaraya Life. It's hello@idaraya-life.org. And Ekhaya Empowerment right now, you can find us on Facebook. If you search for Ekhaya Empowerment UK, you will find us. You can also send us an email, ekhaya.empowerment@gmail.com. But get in touch. And if there's something that's just come to your mind that you feel like you need help with, I suggest get in touch with us. If we don't know, we probably know someone else who knows.
For anyone listening at home, is there anything that you would like to say about, you know, Black History Month, about Black lives, about moving the Black History Lives Matter protest forward, like we've discussed? What would you like to say to those listening or watching this episode of Pride Matters?
I want people to be open to the reality that they may have been wrong. They genuinely may have just misunderstood, and that there is so much information that is out there, and there is no excuse to continue to be wrong. We've got all that information out there. We've got so much to learn about each other. And rather than sort of wallowing or being fearful that you're going to say the wrong thing, or you're not engaging, or maybe you genuinely are in a space where you do feel like you're better than the other right now, you may be wrong. Get some information. And it's not, the onus isn't on Black people to sort of like forcefully feed you history. The information is out there, and just paying it forward and being kind and being open-minded, you'll find will get you on track to helping us build that better world that we all want. So in terms of galvanizing the movement and supporting the movement, just recognize that you have something to learn. It might be a little, it might be a lot, but be open to that. It will be really helpful.
So Ayisatu, thank you very much for joining us. I'm sure we could talk for much longer.
I know.
Yeah, it's been really interesting, so thank you very much.
Thank you so much for giving me this time. Honestly, I really appreciate it.
First, can you just tell us a little bit about you and some of the work that you're doing?
Yeah. So I'm a registered dietitian. I'm living in the southern United States, and I'm Black. And those really, really influence so much of my experience in life and even my relationship to health promotion. When I was going through undergrad, all the emphasis on poor health outcomes for African Americans, the emphasis was on personal responsibility. So essentially people kept blaming the consumer, saying people are having all these health problems because they're too ignorant to eat properly, or they're too ignorant to earn enough to get out of neighborhoods where they don't have good access to food. But in reality, after years of working and years of research, that theory doesn't hold any water. What really makes sense and explains the health disparities is that being oppressed is stressful. And when your chronic stress level is high, stress breaks the body down. We all know that stress breaks the body down. And almost everybody has had an experience where psychological distress caused you physical symptoms, whether it was you went to an interview, you got super nervous and you had to run to the restroom. We've had that experience of thoughts affecting our body. We all know that that's real. But because people who are doing the oppressing don't want to reel it in with the white supremacy, people don't want to discuss that in reality, these groups of people we say we want to help, we are making them sick. There are so many disparities in healthcare in the United States. It doesn't matter how much money you have as a Black American. You can go for healthcare and get inferior service. You can almost expect it. You're less likely to get the painkillers that you need. You're less likely to get interventions that require people to actually sit and talk with you. If they can just write a prescription for you, you may get that. If you have another prescription that you're taking that conflicts with that prescription, good luck to you. Like, this has been documented, all of these disparities that we can attribute to the effects of racism. And then if you add to that being LGBTQIA+, or being in a larger body, your chances of getting good healthcare, they just drop tremendously. And it doesn't matter how much money you have. This is the infuriating thing, that people like to blame it on poverty, but it really is that the issue is racism, homophobia, transphobia, misogyny even, because physicians love to ignore femme presenting people when they say they have a symptom, everything psychosomatic. So my passion is working on shining a light on the fact that these health disparities are related to systems of oppression. All of these systems of oppression are related to each other. None of us are free until all of us are free, because even homophobia in the Black community in the US, I'm not positive about other places. Well, I am positive, but I'm not going to speak to that because people don't like it when you act like you're an expert on their part of the world. However, the homophobia and the transphobia in the Black community is nauseating. And if we don't understand how important intersectionality is and how much we're hurting people who need a safe place, if we continue to not question those systems, we're really missing an opportunity to be strong as marginalized and other people as a massive community. Like, even though we all have different experiences with marginalization, what it does to a human when they're marginalized is so similar that you could form like a femmes of color group and find that Filipino women and Indigenous women and Black women are going to share so many similar issues related to not being in tune with their body because they've been trained not to trust themselves. They've been trained to think that desire is somehow grotesque and not a natural signal we get in nature of what we should do. Pleasure is a signal in nature. It isn't something we should demonize. But by and large, the colonized experience is don't trust the body. We're at war with nature. And an extension of that is we're always at war with ourselves. So my work is really centered on decolonization, but with a heavy emphasis on queer folks, because that's the community I belong to and just the community I like to spend the most time with.
I know you, Dalia, talk on your website about promoting health and happiness for the BIPOC and LGBTQ plus community. What do those phrases mean, just for anyone that doesn't know, and why is promoting health and happiness in specifically those groups important?
Well, BIPOC is for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So basically, anyone who is not white passing or white presenting. And a lot of times, honestly, they're people who identify as people of color who have very white skin. But maybe, especially in the United States, if you come from another country, people still will not classify you as white American, no matter how identical your skin color is to other white Americans. It's interesting how obvious it is that race is a social construct if you can take a flight and your race changes, but that literally happens to people all the time. So you could be white at home and you fly to the US and all of a sudden people say you're something different. But also the LGBTQIA plus community, that's everybody. And I know because people are really trying to find exactly what identities resonate with them. You know, the plus, it just keeps growing. The acronym gets bigger and bigger. And of course, I want to include everyone, but everybody who is not that cis hetero norm, and that's in air quotes, that everyone is accustomed to centering messaging on. I think it's important to focus on your happiness and health in a holistic way, meaning, is my life what I want it to be? Am I doing what I want creatively? Do the people around me make me feel safe? Can I fully be myself around them? Do I laugh a lot every day? Not just health centered on this very prescriptive, oh, you must be in a thin body. And if you can help it, please make sure that body's white. And if it's not white, make sure that you can get as close to white as possible. So if you have curly hair, straighten it. If you have dark skin, brighten it. A lot of bleaching creams say brightening skin. And all of that is so toxic because I don't believe you can fully live your life the way you're meant to live it if you can't accept that who you really are and your true nature is perfect. And even in diet culture, you see all the time people present like this thin, straight, cis woman usually as the ideal. But in the body positivity movement as well, they've started to do the same thing, like a slightly thicker but still straight cis white lady is the ideal. And they encourage you to love your body and never alter your body. Where does that leave people that are trans? You know, to leave that out of the messaging that sometimes who you are is trans. That's part of the natural human experience. And so wanting to change your body is not a bad thing. That's 100% your business. And when you fully accept who you are as a trans person, you might decide to change your body. You might decide not to change your body. And anywhere on that spectrum is fine because that's 100% your business. But to not even mention that leaves so many people out. And how can people live their best life if they can't find a way to make peace with who they really are? I don't believe you can.
We know that Black and ethnic minority communities and also the LGBT plus communities disproportionately face health inequalities. And also, on top of that, when they do access services here in the UK, I can't speak on behalf of America, but when they do access those services, they get lower quality services. They are less satisfied than their white or straight counterparts, and that's a real shame. So we know that there's a problem. So I think it's really important that you are addressing those issues. I know one of the projects, your podcast that you're working on, is called Body Liberation for All. Can you tell us a little bit about what that project's about and why you started it, I guess?
I started it because I was so sick and tired of seeing registered dietitians and other people in healthcare present these really superficial solutions to happiness and health. Like, oh, if you just eat an apple every day, if you just go vegan, if you just always something external, and making it the responsibility of the individual to be able to live this fabulous, super healthy life with access to all the privilege. When it doesn't matter how many apples you eat, if you are not an able-bodied person, you're not magically going to not be in a wheelchair. You are not magically going to get rid of your chronic illness. I have a chronic illness, it's not going to go away if I eat all vegetables. And just that presentation of wellness only looking one way was just really irksome. I was just so tired of seeing all of these people who claim they want to serve the public, but then they only present images that help out this tiny group of people. And when you look at the entire planet, how many people are thin, able-bodied, cis, white, and het? That is the minority. And yet, media is constantly centered on that narrative. What about the rest of the planet? Like, what about everybody else? And so I just felt called to start centering my work and messaging on what have the queer elders, essentially, like the people before us, done to find health and happiness and wholeness. Because not long ago, literally like the generation before us and maybe one more, people were born into a situation where homosexuality was still illegal. And everywhere they went growing up, they were constantly fed negative messaging about being gay. How did people manage to make it to their 50s, make it to their 60s, and live happy, full lives? So I wanted to interview people who have had that experience, and not necessarily just elders to me, but at my age, at 38, I'm already an elder to some people. So showing people who maybe live in parts of the world that aren't able to see a lot of examples of queer people living wonderful lives. My goal is that they can tune into the show and hear that, yes, there are people who recovered from rejection from their family. There are people who recovered from being fired when they transitioned. There are people who found a way to make their life their own without compromising who they are. And there were hurdles, but it can be done. And this is how beautiful it looks when it is done. I know that research shows that your baseline levels of stress are major predictors of health outcomes. But even though marginalization sucks and makes you sick and raises your stress level, there are countermeasures that we can take to help with that. You just don't see it emphasized because the dominant culture literally doesn't care how we're doing. If you build community, if you find spaces where you feel safe and your marginalized identities are celebrated, it really helps to counter the damage. So if you're in an area where you can't do that in person because it's not safe for you, or you're too young to be able to come out and not have to worry about what your parents say about it, because it literally can be the difference between homelessness and having a place to stay, you can still have that sense of community with people long distance. You can have that online. You can listen to the podcast and know there's a world of people out here waiting for you when you are in safe enough of a place to truly be yourself.
What does Black History Month mean to you, and why do you think it's still important and relevant?
For me, it is an opportunity to try and see how often am I hearing from different kinds of voices. Because I was raised in the South, that still is where the bulk of the Black population is in the US. So to me, growing up, I did not feel like our numbers were nearly as low as they actually are. So I grew up in a town where the population was like 60-40. And now that I'm closer to Atlanta, it's probably flipped the other way, where mostly during the day I work with Black people. I am partnered with a white person, so I do see him every day. But it's just very interesting to me, the concept that in the US they only want to give Black people 1 month worth of attention. I can understand that in a place where maybe Black people didn't have as heavy of an influence on the trajectory of the entire country. But here, I really feel like they're out of control, limiting us to February. And I'm wondering how much longer that will really vibe with people and how much longer that will be in style, because it feels like constantly people are, I don't even know how to boil it down, but they're culture vultures everywhere. And so much of American music was inspired by Black people. So much of American culture, American cuisine, it comes from Black people, but things are constantly kind of ripped away from the community and whitewashed a little bit. And then, like, the credit isn't given to the extent of literal products being stolen from people, credit being stolen for inventions, even something as basic as, I want to say, pancakes. It's maybe the wrong treat, but I want to say that Jefferson and his cook on a trip to France, discovered something like crepes and decided to bring him here and make him thicker. And of course, Jefferson is credited with that. And that cook was obviously one of his slaves. Like, that, just the amount of idea theft that goes on, to say that there's only enough Black history for February is obscene. And then the things that they focus on, it's always the same people. It's always, George Washington Carver and people who, for the time, revolutionary, amazing people, brilliant people, obviously. But I don't believe if they were alive now, they still would be comfortable with the subservience and the crumbs. There was a time after Reconstruction, or I would say honestly during Reconstruction, where Black America was making massive amounts of progress with political power and moving forward, and then the North withdrew. So it's just like when a nation claims it wants to help another nation and they stay after the conflict is officially over to stabilize the region, they obviously left way too soon. And people who just had to get their claws back into white supremacy and power reverse so much progress that was made. But as a nation, I feel like the US constantly focuses on, oh, these poor little Black people, they need help, and they will not acknowledge that state sanctioned violence against Black people, state sanctioned property theft, is really the reason why the disparities are so large. And it absolutely didn't end when slavery ended, and it still hasn't ended. So I think especially this February, I'm really wondering, aside from like in the public school system, who really celebrates it. Like, I see McDonald's and other large corporations will say, oh, we this month, we're going to pretend we love Black people and feature them in ads or whatever. But even then, you're promoting products and services that don't really help the community. It feels very exploitive. It feels like an empty gesture from me living here, that it doesn't mean anything. And 1 month is a ripoff. And so much of the history has been suppressed. I just, This year, it was interesting. I saw a lot of people acknowledging Juneteenth, which apparently has always been a big holiday among Black Americans in the US. I honestly did not know about it until I moved to Atlanta. So much of the country here, we're still struggling with internalized depression. So there's so many people who don't want to stand out and really emphasize and celebrate their Blackness. So I missed out on a lot of things because I was raised in like a very white centered church. And they saw being into your Black culture as being kind of worldly and not spiritual. So anyway, I learned about that celebration later in life. And this year, though, is the first time that I feel like the whole country acknowledged that it existed. And I'm thinking that we're going to see more and more Black Americans celebrating their Blackness on Juneteenth rather than February, because that's more of like a state assigned thing, whereas Juneteenth is really linked to the concept of freedom for Black Americans.
Black people, LGBT plus people, people of other minorities exist every day.
Yes. Yes, that would be great. I feel like they can be involved if they want to, but I really don't believe the movement can be stopped. It's just like, I never thought about it before, how awkward and uncomfortable it must have been to live through a major civil rights movement. And knowing how many people I know that lived through that never talked about it, it never occurred to me, it never crossed my mind that that's probably because it was super traumatic and nobody wants to think about it. But you don't need permission and you don't need corporate support or sponsorship to demand rights that you were born with. These are our basic human rights, and we don't need permission or support really from allies. Allies are great and all, but we don't need to be saved. If we even just have more cohesiveness between the marginalized groups, that's most of us. That's really, I really feel like if corporations want to try and do the right thing, they could be helpful, because money definitely motivates people here in the West. But at the same time, a corporation is not a person. And so I'm always going to question a corporation's ability to be ethical and to behave as though they have a soul. It's a group of people. It's very easy to shirk responsibilities and to decide to focus on things that are not people centered. I think because of technology now, every time a LGBTQIA plus person creates their own space, every time a person of color creates their own space, or a religious minority that's being given a hard time creates their own space, I think that is what is going to make the difference.
What change do you think needs to happen to accelerate, I guess, that pace of change towards inclusion?
I think everyone who can tell that there's a problem has to be steadfast about bringing it up and identifying the issues in their environment, even when people try and gaslight you and tell you everything's fine. Being a biased person or having some racist views doesn't necessarily make you a piece of trash. If you see that a family member is exhibiting bias, or a coworker that you actually really like is being biased, or maybe has some issues with homophobia, transphobia, racism, you're not saying they're a horrible person by calling them out on it. And sometimes it is helpful to people for you to own your own bias and to own areas where you've grown, and to be transparent and saying, and I'm still growing, because this is an ongoing process, and this poison, all of these negative messages are everywhere. So of course we all have some of it. I think that is very helpful, especially for people to do around identities that you're not like in your areas of privilege. And everybody can do this because everybody has access to some privilege. In your areas of privilege, to really double down on calling people to task who are in that same privileged group as you, and explaining how you've learned, and also understanding that one-on-one work is important, but the biggest changes that will affect the lives of individual people are all going to be related to policy. So if you hear that somebody doesn't believe marriage equality is important and they're running for office and you like a lot of what they say in other areas, under no circumstances can you endorse that person. Policy is what really, really affects people's lives in a major way. So staying active in the political process and understanding how things work in your country, in your community, and connecting to people who are already doing the work to see how you can get in and be the most effective. And you don't have to go way far out of your comfort zone, but there's probably something you can do. You just should reach out to the organizations that are already doing the work and see what's a fit for you.
Change and activism happens every day on a local level when people get involved in their local neighborhoods, in local politics. Because, like you said, policy and politics are the part of everyday life. We're coming to the end of this interview, so I guess just before we wrap up, etc., is there anything that you particularly would like to say to our listeners in general?
That it is very helpful when white people understand that if somebody wants to create a space that's dedicated to people who are not white, it isn't a rejection. It isn't that people don't trust you or love you. It's that people have a lot of trauma around engaging with white people, and it takes a long time to really feel safe. And if you really want to work on healing, a lot of times the fastest way to eliminate that fear that someone's going to reject you is to spend time around people who share some similar marginalized identities, and just supporting that instead of questioning it when you see people doing it, and understanding that people may siphon off for some activities, but we all come back together in other spaces, and that's okay. What we're wanting is for the power to be shared and for us to all be equals and be family. When someone asks for equality, they're not trying to take something away from you. They're just asking you to share.
Thank you very much, Dalia, for joining us on this episode. Where can people find you and find out more about the work that you're doing?
You can subscribe to the podcast like anywhere you enjoy podcasts, iTunes or the Google Store, Google Play. And that's Body Liberation for All. Probably the best way to keep up with me is to just join the mailing list. That's sendfox.com/Dalia Kinsey, DALIA. And I'm sure the link will be in the show notes. On Instagram and all the places, I'm Dalia Kinsey RD. And I want to thank you for the work that you're doing. I really, really think we need more shows like this, and to see young people interested in the political process and really working on intersectionality is so inspirational, and it's just a joy to see.
Thank you very much, Dalia. Thanks. First, thank you for joining us on the podcast today. I guess first, Kemoy, can you just tell me a little bit about you and some of the work that you're doing across Greater Manchester?
Absolutely. So my name is Kemoy Walker. I'm a youth worker, head of year, ambassador for Mossad, ambassador for Manchester. And I work with a range of different young people. It's not just, it's young people from a range of different backgrounds, culture that I work with on a daily basis. And my mantra is always improving the life chances of our young people, as well as ensuring that they have a better life chances in life.
Why do you think giving young people a voice in politics is important?
Because young people are out there, they're experiencing stuff that not many people that are, for example, in politics are. So you can't make a decision on a young person's life and what they are doing, because you're not there to see the stuff that young people are going through. So I think people need to take that into consideration a bit more, especially people within politics, to understand the struggles that young people face. And I think it's very important that we listen to our young people's voices, and we definitely need a lot of young people in politics, especially young people from those disadvantaged communities who can share the story.
What role do you think government has in sort of promoting diversity, inclusion, young people having a voice across Greater Manchester in particular?
At the moment, it's not currently being promoted. It's not showing enough young people from Black and ethnic minority background in politics, and it's not showing the world a true reflection of the diverse country that we live in. And I think if more communities and more young people from all walks of life was able to see in politics that, BME young people and, BME adults are involved, then it will direct those people to get involved in places like politics. And I think the government needs to understand that at the moment, it isn't really showing a diverse and true reflection of the makeup of the country. So I think it's very important that it is looked into, and I think it's very important that there are some action plans to try and involve more people into government that can, help to influence those decisions.
What would you say are the changes that need to make to sort of drive that, the progression of Black and ethnic minority communities, but also generally equality and diversity?
I think you just need people that know, that understand, that come from a community level, that can say, do you know what, this is what needs to be changed, and people need to listen. And I think it's important. I think we do need change makers out there, people that are passionate, like myself and others, that want to see the change come, because we can't expect government to change it if they're not aware of what's going on. So it's people like us. I'm sorry, when I say people like us, I mean it's people like the community, the driving force that needs to get involved into those levels in government to then make those voices be heard. Because if we're not in there, if people from the community is not in there, then the government don't know what's going on.
And I know you started an organisation a few years ago, which is KYSO, which I believe is Keen Youth Shout Out. What is some of the work that you're doing with that organisation to sort of promote Black and ethnic minority communities' voices?
Absolutely. So it's like what I mentioned before, improving the life chances of our young people to mitigate disadvantage. Mitigating disadvantage means that if those young people come from those communities where, say, for example, they're struggling with finances, they're struggling with not knowing how to pay rent, or, they're struggling because there isn't a lot of opportunities out there, KYSO and other youth providers are mitigating that disadvantage, because we know what the issues are, and we're looking into those issues to make sure that those young people are equipped with the best life chances going. And if that means we're putting on courses, workshops and other things to help look at those areas, i.e. finance and other areas like that, then we're looking to develop those packages to support those young people, so we're mitigating those disadvantages. So there is a lot of great organizations, i.e. KYSO and others, that want to make sure that young people become the best version of themselves, to have the best opportunities in life that life can offer, that will mitigate those disadvantages.
I know, Kemoy, you're a DJ and artist yourself, and today actually you're going out to the Manchester International Festival. What are you doing there? What are you getting up to yourself?
That's a good question. So I think they just want me to talk about the arts and what it's like being someone who's BME and equality and diversity. And it's more to kind of look at, the performers that we have on KYSO's books, for example, are doing amazing work. We've performed everywhere, all over. We've really, really showed what Manchester is about. So I think some of the conversations will be looking at the local community level of performing arts and the work that KYSO does. So I'm really excited because I'm going to be talking alongside another famous group, Boy Blue, and it'd be great to kind of touch base and network and find out how we can both support each other, especially with the work I do with young people around performing arts.
What does Black History Month mean to you, and why do you think it's important to recognise Black culture today?
There's so much greatness within the Black culture, same like there is with any other culture. However, Black culture is not highlighted enough. When you look at Part Life, Glastonbury and all these amazing festivals, and you speak to young people across Greater Manchester or Manchester or the UK, they will tell you at least so many different acts or musicians that they listen to, or artists that they listen to, that are from Black cultures. But why is it not being highlighted enough? So Black History Month really goes in deep to look at those people who are contributing to the UK economy, or contributing to the UK culture that's not regularly highlighted, in society. So I think it's important to have a month where we can reflect and we can think of those people that are making history in the UK.
One of the most prominent themes, I think, that's come out from talking to our guests throughout Black History Month has been this idea of visibility and essentially just pushing Black people as a part of everyday life, as a part of culture. And I think that's definitely one of the themes that stood out to me, because visibility for communities like the Black and ethnic minority community, like the LGBT plus community, etc., is so important. For all of our listeners at home, is there anything that you would like to say about equality, diversity? Is there anything poignant that you would just like to share with our listeners at home?
Equality and diversity to me means a lot, because obviously I wasn't born here, but I came here at a time where there wasn't such thing as equality and diversity. So watching the work that's took place and the activism of people who have really kind of hit home with some home truths about, about England and just some of the things that need to change has been incredible to watch and see. And I think change is coming, and I love to see some of the great work that's happening now.
I'm sure all of our listeners can hear your passion for young people and promoting equality and diversity in the work you do. For people to find out more about you and the work you're doing with KAISO and elsewhere, where is the best place to find out about KAISO and the work that you do?
Yeah, I'm very, very active on Twitter. I'm a very good tweeter, so I'll always tweet about the work that's going on in the community. So everything's always my first name and surname. So my Twitter is @Kemoy Walker. My website is kemoywalker.co.uk. My Instagram is kemoy.walker. So literally everything's always Kemoy Walker or kemoy.walker. But people can always find out more by visiting the website, going on my Twitter. KAISO now is kaisoclub.co.uk. Everything's KAISO Club. Instagram is @KAISO Club. The website is kaisoclub.co.uk. So we're very, very active on there as well, and always showcasing the great work that KAISO is doing.
That's amazing. Thank you very much, Kemoy, for joining us and talking about your amazing projects. And I look forward to seeing more from what you're doing. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Pride Matters. If you'd like to be involved in the next episode, just use the hashtag pridematterspodcast with a question or topic you would like us to discuss. Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for this month's episode, but we'll be back next month with a brand new episode. So make sure to tune in on your favourite streaming platform, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And you can also subscribe to our channel on YouTube to hear more from communities across Salford and beyond.